And so that word grace in verse number 3 in the Greek is the word charis, and it's the word that means favor. It's a word that means kindness. And so when we talk about the grace that has been given to Paul, Paul is referring to a grace that has been given to him by God. And so he's basically saying God has given him favor and God has given him kindness. And because God has given him this favor and kindness, then Paul says, in my dealings with you, I'm also going to extend to you grace. I'm going to speak to you through the grace that has been given unto me. And so when you speak of that word grace, you speak, if you can imagine somebody kind of leaning your way, or they have a natural inclination to favor you or to bless you. And so a lot of times when there is a vote, when there's the opportunity for us to elect a new person to a particular seat, we understand that sometimes people in a community have a tendency to lean towards a particular candidate for whatever reason. When you are leaning towards someone or something, you're basically saying, I am in favor of that one. And so what God says, even through grace, he's saying, I'm leaning toward you always. In essence, I'm always inclined to bless you and to be kind to you. And when I think about that attribute of God, the fact that he is always leaning towards me, the fact that God always wants to bless me, it just makes me happy. And so when we speak of this grace, we understand that in verse number 6, Paul begins to talk about the gifts that have been given. And he speaks of gifts that differ one from another. And the only reason Paul is having this conversation, it's just an exhortation to practical living, but he starts out talking about, you got to watch your pride level. You have to make sure that you present your body a living sacrifice, that you come to God. But even in coming to God, he's reminding the church at Rome, he says, listen, when you come to God, you got to humble yourself. And not just then, when you're walking about in your day-to-day business, you got to make sure that you humble yourself. Don't lift yourself up. Don't be so full of pride. And so Paul goes on to talk about the fact that we have a responsibility. God has gifted us, but those gifts came from God. It's not that we woke up one morning and decided that we were going to do certain things, but instead it was God who gifted us. And so Paul speaks in verse number 6 about a special grace that is given us for certain gifts to operate in us. And he basically declares for every single one of us, there is something in your life that you do well. And chances are you have been given God's grace to do certain things well. And so you don't just wake up and get excited about the fact that you can do things well, but instead, as a believer and as a child of God, you acknowledge the reason I can do this well is because of God's grace.